Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Well, it sounds pretty good from here. Yeah. I don't even have to yell right into it. My name is Mark Koyama, and I'm the settled pastor at the United Church of Jaffrey in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. And I was the individual who came up with this idea for this series of quilts that we have with us this evening. One of the remarkable things about the quilts, the quilt display, is that they go to different churches and they act in some ways as a kind of liturgical provocation. People in the churches kind of come up with different ideas of how to show respect for them. And one of the ways that they came up with, that one church came up with that I find very meaningful, is that they came up with this idea of observing the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that George Floyd was on the ground, pinned to the ground on the street on the day that he died, when these words were being uttered, right? So we find that to be a very remarkable and a beautiful liturgical observation of the solemnity of these quilts. So I would like to offer that to you as an opportunity to spend the next 9 minutes and 29 seconds in silence, experiencing the quilts. Now you can begin the quilts at the beginning of the ramp up there and come down. And during that period, you will notice what an extraordinarily long time 9 minutes and 29 seconds is. It's an uncomfortable amount of time. So if you feel discomfort, that's part of the experience. So I will open this 9 minutes and 29 seconds by ringing this bell. And then when that 9 minutes and 29 seconds is over, I'll ring it again. We can join in and begin the rest of our program. Let us join together in prayer. God, who gave us breath, Christ, who pitched his tent among us, Holy Spirit, who works through us, come by here. Join us, we pray, gathered as we are in this place to confront once again that wound, the turning away from you that is original to the founding of this nation. This white landowning male will to power that has poisoned our communal lives for centuries, and that on a late afternoon in May 2020 concentrated its violence for 9.5 fatal minutes on a kneecap that pushed down on the neck of a man named George Floyd. When Mr. Floyd cried out for breath, when in his extremity he cried out to the mother who bore him, he uttered words that, like the words that Christ uttered on the cross, are eternal. They are not sound bites for the evening news, here today and gone tomorrow. The words that are stitched in these quilts are a lament raised to you, O God. They are the lament of the centuries. God of transformation, don't let us off the hook. Compel us to take off our sandals that we might know and harness the love that you freely give us. Let us know this love with more than just our intellects. Let us feel it from the inside out and through the very soles of our feet as we walk this long road. Reveal to us the necessity of transformation. Open us to the empathy that can drop like a pebble into the deep reservoir, our moral yearning that is at the core of our beings. In the silence, let the ripples move. Here in this place, we are in company with dedicated educators who foster this opening of the soul that occurs at the painfully ironic intersection of beauty and suffering. Here in this place, we are in company with dedicated educators who are not conformed to this world, but are transformed by the renewing of their minds, who seek to discern what is your will, O God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Empower them, we pray, that they may open us and transform us. Together we offer you these prayers in thread to you through Christ, the one who knew our suffering, now and evermore. Amen. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Koyama. I am the settled pastor at the United Church of Jaffrey in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. And I am also the person who, on a Saturday morning, a week after George Floyd was killed in that brutal manner, I had an idea. And that idea was that I have a whole bunch of folks in my church who like to quilt. And then I had another idea, which was that, well, in fact, that's true of many churches. And then that third idea came along, which was that this has been done before. We had the AIDS quilt in the 1980s, right? Which changed everything with regards to the AIDS pandemic, the AIDS epidemic. So these three ideas came together. And suddenly I realized that I was in the presence of an idea that really had possibility. And then later that day, I received an email from an organization that was promoting police reform. And in that email was this, looked like a poem on the page. Started reading it. I suddenly, as I was reading this poem, I gradually became aware that I was reading the most painful poem that ever could be written. In fact, it wasn't written, it was spoken. And that at the end of that poem, when the poem came to an end with that final line, "I can't breathe," the person is dead. So that idea of the quilts came together with this idea of the text that we all needed to hear and that we all needed not to forget. And so I made a proposal to the United Church of Christ of New Hampshire, the conference, and I sent that, and with their permission, they sent that proposal out to all the churches in New Hampshire. And 9 churches responded to this call. And each of those churches made one of these quilts that you saw this evening. It was a collaboration of 9 churches. And then we had we had quilt number 11 and 12, which came a little bit later. 12 is not here, just 11. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce you to Kathy. Kathy, could you stand? Kathy Blair here was when I sent out that proposal, Kathy was the first to respond. Thank you, Kathy. And you can imagine when I sent out that proposal, I was thinking, am I gonna get any response at all? Kathy thankfully responded. And Kathy, would you like to tell us where you're from and what?
I am from the United Church of Christ in Keene, New Hampshire. Keene is a small city in the southwest corner of New Hampshire. I grew up on a dairy farm originally. I learned how to sew when I was 7 in 4-H and have been sewing for 6 decades. And this sewing, the quilting that I did on this project is perhaps the most significant work that I have done. And I'm so pleased to be working with Reverend Mark and have had the opportunity to work with Harriet Ward and get to know and love her also. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Kathy. Kathy mentioned Harriet Ward. Harriet Ward was the 3rd member of our Sacred Ally Quilt Ministry. She was the only African-American woman who was involved with the project at the time. And she was the one who made quilt number 3 and quilt number 9. So the quilt that you saw early on with the star in the center of it, which is the Ghanaian flag and the words written over it. And then this quilt number 9, which was the final, I Can't Breathe, for both the work of Harriet Ward. Harriet and I have always done these sacred conversations together. Unfortunately, she died in January. And so I'd like to dedicate this evening to her memory. She was one who always had something very, very interesting to say, and she never let you off the hook. let you off the hook. And you never did quite know exactly what she was going to say, but it was always going to be interesting, and it was always going to make sure that you knew that you weren't off the hook. When this project first began, I spoke to a colleague, Reverend Chris Owen, who I had previously done some collaboration with, doing a podcast, because I had done some previous social justice work with regards to the mass shootings that were happening in 2019. And Reverend Owen did a podcast with me about that. And so I said to Chris, I said, would you be interested in this for a podcast? And he said, well, how about we do a film? And I said, yeah, let's do that. So the film that you're about to see is the work of Reverend Chris Owen and his colleague, Jan Sutcliffe. And they together made this film, which is a chronicle of the process, the initial process of putting together the quilts. It was definitely like one of those moments where, you know, that kind of the hair stands up on the back of your neck when they were actually all in one place for the first time.
I was really hesitant to go up on that mountain because I get really tired of being the only Black person. You always have this edge of concern, like who to trust. You have to be really careful. And I just wasn't sure.
We witnessed the terrible incident of George Floyd on TV and just the horror of that moment. And it was absolutely heart-wrenching.
George Floyd! George Floyd!
But here we saw this man struggling for breath, and another man whose expressions on his face were, I'll never forget them, because he didn't care. He did not care.
I can't breathe! 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 I can't breathe!
These words are not a current event. I know that the people around me here were looking at it as a now, but I wasn't.
I called Mark and I said, we have to do something.
I knew that there was a demographic of people in the churches in New Hampshire who wanted to be allies but didn't know how. And that I felt like this might be a way.
He proposed an idea that he had using the last words of George Floyd.
Mark mentioned a quilt. Well, I come from a long line of quilters, and it just spoke to me that this was something that we could do.
And I thought it was a beautiful idea, but I don't sew, I don't quilt. Sometimes I can't even hold scissors these days. But I'd read the words.
She saw it almost in stanzas as a poem, and she offered to break it down into different sections.
They spoke to me in two levels, not just the pain he was going through as his life was being thoughtlessly and cruelly snuffed out, But in there are the same words and thoughts that people like myself and Mr. Floyd feel every day in most of our interactions. Just how life is every day.
When when I first had this idea, I thought to myself, the first thing I thought to myself was, is this exploitative? Are we exploiting the last words of a man who died in agony?
I set about designing the quilt, putting the words down, and by the time I got to the end of the words, I couldn't even get to the end because I was in tears.
The original conception was a spectrum of emotions. We start with the reds and the panic, and then it continues on through the blues and purples of him losing consciousness.
You can't draw a picture of it. There's no pattern. A square that has lines in it, then blends into another fabric that has lines in it. This just goes just right here. Look at that. I got a line. Look, I got another line. Look, I made a flower.
Everything had intention. There's not a detail that was, oh, we'll put this here, we'll do that. Everything had a specific intention.
What I love about this is how the words are expressive. This is a faucet, and there's water droplets in there. And I think that's just amazing.
Reading the words, actually seeing them, actually working with them. To me, it's powerful. Words are powerful.
So this word that's at the top of our quilt, the word mama, there was a elderly African-American man. He was talking about the way George Floyd had called out to his mother and was, brought to tears with the pathos of that, of Mr. Floyd calling out to his mother in his last breaths.
Sometimes I'd be working on it and I'd find myself crying. Just of all I was trying to say and all it was saying back to me. So this is a really special quilt to me. There's even a cross in here. Just sort of imagined him down here with a knee on his neck and just looking up and saying, I'm going. And maybe seeing that cross and kind of moving to a new life. But one way or the other, he would go to this beautiful home. Yeah.
Are there any particular words or phrases that really touched you?
It's my face. And begging, please. Please. And everything that he could feel, like every body part, the immense pressure everywhere on his body as his life is just mercilessly being taken for no reason from his face. Just his face. You don't even get to control your face. Something that no control over, and somebody thinks it's a reason to treat you like you're not human. No trial by jury. Just one man decided he wasn't worth it. Just discarded for his face.
For me, breath has been central to this whole project. Being created in the image of God is being given breath. This notion that we could deprive each other of that breath is another way of talking about depriving each other of our connection to the holy, our connection to God.
Okay.
Well, I have seen it at this stage, I believe, yes.
We had a total of 9 congregations.
Working and investing time, thought, love, hope, all the things that we wanted to come from making these quilts.
Thank you so much for everything, Lori. Thank you. We all lived with those words for so long. Part of our intention was to make sure that the discussion that was going on was not just going to, fall off the cliff with the end of the news cycle.
In the middle of the quilt project, I was actually having a meltdown. Someone came in and said, "Well, Harriet, all lives matter." And then someone came in and told me that George Floyd was nothing but a criminal. And I was enraged. I was so angry, and I was hurt.
That process of slowing it down and living with that moment for that length of time was a kind of spiritual reckoning. It was a kind of spiritual practice.
My grandmother hated white people. And so she used to say, "Spit in the mud, Jesus, and wake those people up." Yeah, that's in John, right? Yeah. Chapter 9. It's also in Mark, chapter 8. I can't remember the verse. Where Jesus, he spits in the mud and he spreads it over the blind man's eyes. After he spread the mud, he told this man to go wash in this pool and don't go back to your village. In this quilt project where we're looking at these words that people seem to think are a current event and never happened before or never paid attention to them, or they have their sort of ephemeral outrage, but then they can go eat something and have a bottle of wine and forget about it the next day. But these words are spit in the mud, Jesus, is the response. Like, what? Why don't you get this? Have you not known of the 400 years? Spit in the mud, Jesus. Don't go back to your comfortable village and eat some scallops and lemon and then forget about it.
Thank you for coming to this blessing of the quilts.
All the time that we were working on this, my daughter and I, we'd talk about George, we'd talk about the words, but we talked about what could happen with this quilt. The value was in getting it out so that other people could see it.
Bless this quilt, O Lord, the work of human hands.
Bless this quilt, O Lord, the work of human hands.
Give it life.
Give it life.
Each stitch, O Lord, carries the intention of our hearts.
Each stitch, O Lord, carries the intention of our hearts.
Give it breath.
Give it breath.
Breathe life into its purpose, Lord.
Breathe life into its purpose, Lord.
Fill it full with our desire for justice. Fill it full with our desire for justice.
For if it breathes, it will speak.
For if it breathes, it will speak.
telling its story of pain.
Telling its story of pain.
that we might be rescued by love,
that we might be rescued by love,
that we might be rescued by love, and together heal.
I complain all the time about outrage and amnesia. But while you're working on the quilt, you're not having amnesia. So for a bit there, people were really thinking about this. And that wouldn't have happened without Reverend Koyama.
This would be the time to go up and see the quilts. Try and maintain social distancing if you can.
We put them inside and had people coming inside, and there was a quilt with George Floyd on it. The sun was setting and sunshine right on his face, and it was just very startling. And what struck me is he's here. He's here. He was present with us.
My personal feeling is we need to feel that pain. We need to start to understand. Because we need change. And the only way we can have change happen is to understand the pain and agony of where we were before.
So I saw George Floyd's face, and I understood what it represented. And I was just like, this is really nice. I kind of wanted to wave you over because y'all weren't in the circle. I find it beautiful. I find it great because I feel like the energy has kind of fallen a little bit, and we need people to still come out here and give that good positive energy and stuff. It's that quilt. Hopefully it can change people's minds. Hopefully it can affect people on the inside. Just make them feel it, make them understand how important this is in the future.
This is really when I'm feeling the absence of my dear colleague Harriet. This is the moment when she and I would do our magic. So hopefully I can do it justice without her. But you saw her in the video, and so I'm glad you got that. I think that frequently whenever we would have these conversations, what we would like to do, and I think it's appropriate for us this evening too, is to really find out what you're feeling, what struck you when you walked through the quilts. One of the things that happens with the quilts, I think, is that they create a certain awareness of all the deep intention from within which they're created. They have a prayerful liturgical quality to them. And so I invite you to if anyone who would like to mention anything that may have that you may have noticed about the quilts themselves, or even your response to the film. Those of you online too, you could feel free to raise a hand too if you so desire. Yes. Hmm.
It really, the sentiment that it sounded like a poem was really interesting and showed those words to me in a different light. And the comparison, the continual comparisons to Christ as well, and his last moments and being crucified was really interesting.
I was thinking about that recently, as a matter of fact, that moment when I was reading those words for the first time, and they appeared on my screen as almost like a poem, right? And as a poet myself, and someone who thinks a lot about line breaks and about, you know, and about words, the meaning and the power of words, right? The sound of words. My initial response to those words was an aesthetic response, right? Which is a very strange thing, that I was having an aesthetic response to these words. And then gradually having the realization that what was at stake here was much more than just an aesthetic response. And in some ways, that same process happens when people encounter the quilts, because there is this aesthetic response that happens initially. Because, you know, we understand quilts to be things of beauty, right? And we also understand they also have this symbolic resonance in our culture as being this thing that is made in love and given in love, right? So a quilt in many ways has this symbolic sensibility of love. So when you initially have this response to when you initially see the quilts, I call it kind of a rhetorical sleight of hand in a sense, you know, because you come to this experience with one idea, and then as you proceed through the quilts, you come to a very, very different idea, right? So this relationship between pain and beauty is one of the great ironies of the human condition, right? And one of the things that makes that we're all deeply aware of, but also a little bit uncomfortable with, right? It's not something that you can be entirely comfortable with, this notion that, and James Baldwin said much about this particular relationship, right? The relationship between suffering and beauty. And so you really pick up on something I think that's very, very important about the quilts. Yes.
I was very moved by the impact of slowing everything down and also quieting everything down. Now, in the film, in this building tonight, in your words, something happens there that's very different than our normal outrage, and it's over. It's a very different movement.
Absolutely. That's, you know, if you think about it, it's subversive to our culture, really, really. Because if you think about it, really, the headlong momentum of all of our technology is towards this movement towards making things happen as quickly as possible, right? So all of our computers and all of everything the attempt is towards efficiency, right? And this was the opposite of that, right? The opposite of efficiency. Here we have something that was very intentionally inefficient. And in some ways, I think love is very inefficient. I think that what is at the core of our beings in many ways is a very inefficient thing, right? If there's anything that's ever been hard for you to do in your life, it's probably been a pretty worthwhile thing, right? To me at least, there's a direct correlation between inefficiency and value in some ways, which is very subversive to American culture. You're not going to get a quilt through a Dunkin' Donuts drive-through, right? You can't go through a drive-through and order a quilt. It's not going to happen. It takes a long time, and that length of time is extremely important, because that is the spiritual discipline. That's the moment when transformation becomes possible. You don't get transformed by efficiency, you get transformed by inefficiency. Thank you so much for that. That's exactly right. Yeah. Right.
Hi, I came in late. So what struck me the most was the head, seeing the last 7 rows of George Floyd, or the last rows of George Floyd, and it made me remember this event that took place 8 or 9 years ago in somewhere in New York City, that one of my friends took part in, but they did a 7 last rose ceremony. And all of the 7 sayings were from victims of police, Black victims of police violence. I think it was 2015 or 16. Obviously, George Floyd wasn't part of it, but I still remember how impactful that was, and just remembering the embodiment of, and as a Quaker, who I believe, because Quakers have believed that God is within all of us, so that embodiment of God and Christ at that last moment. Especially, I'm listening to the video. I forgot who said it, but one of the speakers said the juxtaposition of Derek Chauvin indifference to a pain of George Floyd, it just stopped, and just but I'm so painful, and my only hope, my only redemption of that is hopefully George Floyd, whatever happens in the afterlife, in that mystery, hopefully George Floyd is wrapped up in that love of God and that love of Christ. And as a Christian, believing in that, that Christ has that final word, evil doesn't triumph. So that God love is
Yeah.
finally loves these victims who suffered horrific censored violence.
Yes, absolutely.
That the only redemption I can only hope for are these
Yeah.
hateful acts.
Thank you very much. There's one of the quilt number 2, which is the quilt that says, "That's my face, man." That quilt number 2. That quilt, which was the work of the Pelham Church, I believe, is a quilt that intentionally creates the heritage of the previous victims of police violence with Black people, and also Jesus as well. And so there's there's some attempt within the frame of our quilts to kind of to acknowledge what Harriet acknowledges in the film, which is that this is not a current event, right? This is not a current event, right? This is something that's been going on for 400 years. And if you think that Jesus was lynched, which James Cone obviously and many suggest also to be the case, then we're talking much more than 400 years, right? So thank you for that. There's another hope of ours is that more quilts will be made, and that we will be able to foster the development of more quilts that also memorialize more people.
Mark, it strikes me that the very patient work of quilt making is akin to the patient work of beginning to heal the horrible racial divides. I'm glad Harriet is in the film because her outrage and her wariness stand in stark tension with her hope and her vision of a more beautiful place as she thinks about his vision in dying. And I think her forthrightness brings a great authenticity to this project.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Molly. One of the things that happened fairly recently, as a matter of fact, probably in the last couple months of her life, was that she came up to me. She called me on the phone. She frequently would call me on the phone. We'd talk for sometimes 5-6 hours. She really knew how to talk, Harriet, and so we would be on the phone for lengthy periods of time, just talking about all kinds of things. So one of the things that she said fairly late in her life was she was very uncomfortable. She became very uncomfortable with the film, and she said, I don't want to cause trouble, but I'm uncomfortable with the film. And I said, explain, tell me. And she said, well, the film, in a way, the film feels a bit like white people feeling good about themselves, and it's in a way, it's like the triumphal kind of celebration of white people kind of saying, look what we did, and indeed, other than Kathy and myself and Harriet, I'm afraid all those other quilters did just disappear. And we actually encountered one of them at a church about 6 months ago, and we asked this woman who had been one of the quilters. We said, how has this changed your life? How have you been influenced by this? And she said, well, I haven't really thought about it since. And you can imagine what that did to Harriet and what that did to me. I mean, it was very painful. And you know, when Harriet, you'll notice that when Harriet says in the film, she says, when we were making those quilts, right? We were not thinking of other things. We were not. But she didn't say afterwards, right? She didn't say like after these people were permanently transformed. No, she didn't say that. She said when we were making the quilts. So one of the roles that she gave to us in this ministry was a brutal honesty about these things. And it was really, really important. And another thing is that you'll notice that in the beginning of this film, I asked a question. I said, is this exploitative? Are we exploiting the words of a dying man? And I think one of the things you'll notice in the film is that that question is never answered. Right? We don't answer that question. And that I think is somewhat intentional, because that question has to continue to be asked. We can't stop asking that question. And because that question continues to be an important question, and a question that destabilizes our and decenters our whiteness. So thank you very much, Molly. It hurts in a way right now for me to be here without Harriet. I think you can see that. But I'm doing I think one of the things that this empowers me to do, that she has empowered me to do, is to be brutally honest about these things and not to let us off the hook, so to speak. But the irony of it is that I'm not Black, and so you know I am half Japanese, so I'm not just a straight white guy, but I'm not Black, and that's something that I need to acknowledge. I do not speak for Black people, but I will also not let us off the hook for this wound that continues to inflict its pain and its suffering on all of us, not just Black people, but all of us. Yes.
How do you think the medium of quilts made a larger impact?
Thank you so much for that question. That's such a great question. So, yeah, the question is, the question that this gentleman asked was, how does the medium of quilting, how is that different from, like, say, working with oils on canvas or photography or some other artistic medium? We had a really interesting moment about this, and we had the quilts on exhibit in a gallery in New York City, and this gallery was a gallery that normally showed photographs, right? And so the gallery owner was a photographer. So we said to we were kind of having this conversation with him. And we had this moment where we said, what would happen if you took really beautiful pictures of these quilts, really high quality pictures of these quilts, and reproduced them and hung them, would they have the same effect that these quilts have? And the answer, I think, pretty clearly is no, right? They just would not have the same value. And the reason is because of this notion of the prayerful intention once again, the time spent on creating these works, which is so crucial, right, to the gravitas that they create. Now, I imagine you could do the same thing potentially with oils or with other art forms, right? Art forms that take time, right? But if you, I don't think, I don't think photography would necessarily of this same, unless it was done in some other way, it wouldn't have the same value. And one of the things that I think is so extraordinary about that we stumbled upon, that was just so extraordinary about this, was that prayerful intention that is sewn into these quilts. It's palpable. It's something that is very real and that you feel. You feel it. It's not intellectual. You feel it. And so as a result, it becomes kind of this more intentionally spiritual mode of encountering this. And if you think of racism as a spiritual problem, which certainly you can, right? Then does it beg a spiritual answer? Certainly, I think it does, yes? So the quilts, I believe, are a spiritual answer to a spiritual problem. And because of that prayerful intention that goes in, the time that it takes to make it. Thank you for that question. Yes.
I can't tell you how many people over the years, women that I know, even if they are not quilters, have said, if I knew I was going to die in a year or two, I would want to make quilts for everyone in my family. And as you were talking about that, that came to me that we all, would want to bless him and nurture him and comfort him. And so the medium of quilts is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And it's not a surprise that the demographic crossover between going to church and quilting is so strong. It's not surprising. It's not a coincidence, because both quilting and following Jesus Christ are grow out of the impulse towards compassion, right? They both are disciplines that create and grow out of this very real impulse to show love to each other, right? What do we do when we give a quilt? We give our love. That's what we do. Amazing. And it crosses all these generations. It bridges all these generations and the cultures. And
thanks so much, Mark.
yes.
I had the opportunity to meet Harriet when we were meeting to plan this event a couple of times, and she was just lovely. And part of her loveliness was her, she's provocative. She was an agitator. And I loved that about her, and that came through, I think, in the film and how you talk about her. But I'm struck by her words, and I'm struck by, we've mentioned already James Cone, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, which is a book that was published, right around the time of Trayvon Martin's murder, right at the beginning of Black Lives Matter movement, and a really important theological text that if people haven't read, I really recommend it. One of the most important texts in the last 100 years. And he also speaks to the terror and the beauty of the cross, right? So I'm interested in this sort of connection, I guess, between the crucifixion and the lynching of George Floyd. The offense of the cross, when you speak of, holding up the possibility this is a kind of exploitative, right? There's something about the offense of the cross that I guess holds out that potential of being exploitative. But then I'm also struck, and I'm trying to tie this together with Harriet's reference to the Jesus spitting in the mud and putting on the blind man's eyes as a reference to the need to wake up, or the need to what's it going to take to break through to white people, and her talk of her mother's hatred of white people. And so I guess I'm wondering about this sort of, there's a question here somewhere about the cross, the crucifixion, the offense of the crucifixion, and conversion, the breaking through that I think is part of the agitational dimension of what Harriet was trying to get at. It seems to me like in this work, right? This intentionality, because she was very aware that it was white people participating in this.
Right.
What's it going to take? Is it going to take some kind of, what's it going to take for there to be a breakthrough toward a conversion that isn't just, as she puts it in the film, ephemeral outrage, right? But something more than that, something deeper than that, that gets at the roots, that isn't just a reaction to, the kind of direct violence of the police, but that gets at the root and the structural violence of the long history of racism, and the structural violence that creates crucifixion. And then I suppose I'm reminded of, John Sobrino's image of taking the crucified down from the cross. So the movement toward, there's a lot, I guess, I'm
there's a
thinking
lot
through,
going
but
on
I
there.
guess it's the cross and conversion is what I'm really after, and what Harriet's after in that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that resonates at all.
Yeah, absolutely, very much so. I can tell you one of the things that Harry would say in response to that, I think, if I'm trying to channel her right now, but one of the things that she has said to me a lot, she says, what we need courageous pastors, right? We need really courageous pastors who are willing to really go out there on a limb about this. And that it's so difficult, particularly in New Hampshire, where most United Church of Christ churches are largely people of European descent, right? So they ask me, like, why are you talking about this all the time? It's not our problem. Yeah. And so one of the things that I said to her, one of the things that I said to Harriet, this is great. I said to her, really church it's about comfort and challenge, right? That's what I said. I said to her, church is really about comfort and challenge. And if you're missing either of those, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. You really need to be able to comfort people. You need to be able to challenge people, right? And she said this to me. She said, your challenge is my comfort. Your challenge is my comfort, right? Which so when people of European descent think of comfort, they think of the status quo. Naturally, because the status quo serves us. When people of African descent think of comfort, they think of the status quo being challenged, because the status quo is a status quo that is deeply painful, and where something like what happened to George Floyd could happen to any of to themselves or to their children at any time. Begin to even imagine, you know, the idea that my son at any moment this could happen to. It is intolerable. And so if I was in that position, then you know, that challenging that would be my comfort. So, and here we have this notion, right? We have at the core of our religion, we have the most important figure, person who we consider divine, is crucified within this intolerable spectacle of violence, right? And that experience is at the core of our religion. And that spectacle, that suffering, that intense suffering is, in some ways, speaks much more to the Black experience in our nation than it does certainly to the experience and to the experience of Native peoples in our country than it does to people of your peoples. And one of the things that Harriet always said to me, she was like, you know, you white folks, you go to Easter much too quickly. You know, it's like, we're still hanging out at the cross. We're still here at the cross. If and there's that song, right? That were you there? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? One of the things that Douglas, theologian from Union, Kelly Brown Douglas, thank you. One of the things that she says is that we were all there. You know, that question, were you there? And she says, yes, we were all there. The question was, where were you? Were you on the cross or were you on the ground? Were you mocking Jesus or were you on the cross? We were all there, she says. Where were you? And that's the question. That's the painful question we all have to think about. Yes.
A couple of things I have is, first, thank you for being here. I think that when you challenged everyone to walk through and take their time, and you said it was going to be uncomfortable, I already knew going into it that it was going to be uncomfortable. But I think that experience is really important for people to continue to live through. Because it's only 9 minutes that they're living through it. They're not experiencing it every day. So I think it's really good that you have that practice at the beginning. I also think about, you know, with Harriet having passed, and I can imagine how hard that must be, and to continue to bring this, you know, forward. And I think that's your call of action, you know, besides being a pastor, is continuing to keep this alive. And it's not just in her name, it's in the name of people who have been murdered at the stake of injustice. And so I think that you continuing to do this is a show of your allyship. And I don't think you're speaking for Black people. I think you're speaking on behalf of the experience that happens. And you're helping to educate and inform in a way that you're able to do that. And so I do think it's really beautiful that these quilts came together in a way that people were able to contribute. And although I kind of saw it going in the direction that it ended up going, with people falling off, I think it's still important and good that you're continuing to keep that voice in the work that's been done.
Thank you very much. I spoke with my wife yesterday on the phone and she said, are you sure you can do this without Harriet? and it was a big question in my life. And it's because it's a very, as you can imagine, it's a very different experience without her. And I thank you for saying what you said. I anticipate that the unanswered question that I ask at the beginning of the film may someday come back and bite me in the ass. You know, I anticipate that. Excuse my language. That's the theological term. But and when that happens, I will try as hard as I can to learn from it and be as humble as I can. But because I you know, I know now that without Harriet here, it's a fundamentally different experience. But I'll try to channel her as much as I can. And I do think that in spite of the fact that many of the quilters kind of evaporated, so to speak, in spite of that, they gave us an extraordinary tool. And they also, there is also a, there is also, there are many opportunities for transformation here, right? Part of the transformation is just that transformation that happens, that the aesthetic to pathos transformation that happens when you experience the quilts, right? But and then there's this talk back there again, you know, again, the sacred conversation is an opportunity for transformation. But perhaps the uber opportunity, the best opportunity, is the opportunity that comes with the prayerful intentionality of the actual creative process. So that's what we're trying to kind of foster more. But we, as Christians, we are called to recognize that racism is the original sin of our nation. It is the original sin of our nation in the sense that our nation is founded on it, and it has been, every generation has inherited it. In that sense, it is our original sin. And the salvation history of our nation, in some ways, is tied to our response to the problem of racism. Racism fundamentally goes against the most fundamental principle of Judeo-Christian theology, which is that we are all made in God's image, right? You can't say that someone is made in 2/3 of God's image. You can't say that, right? That is a sin.
We have time for one more comment or question.
Okay.
This is just a prompt, Mark, for you to maybe share a little bit about the two
yes,
quilts on the table.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Kathy. So, folks, when you have an opportunity before you leave, if you would be so kind as to just take a quick look at this quilt that's on the table here. This quilt was made by Libby White. She is the great-grandmother of Harriet's great-grandmother. And this quilt was made while Libby was still an enslaved person. So this is an artifact extremely precious and meaningful artifact that is worth taking a look at. It's beautiful and very, very, very interesting. And we call it the Ezekiel quilt. And the reason we call it the Ezekiel quilt is because if you look carefully at it, we didn't know this. Harriet didn't know this until a young man in New York, a young 7-year-old child in New York pointed it out to us. There is a circle within a circle in this quilt. So there's the Ezekiel, the circle within the circle. So please take the opportunity to take a quick look at this quilt before you leave. The other quilt here is one that I have the right to just grab onto it and without gloves because I made this one. And it's not really a quilt. It's just this, well, you can see what it is, right? The negative space creates a cross, right? And the idea here, the theological notion that I'm trying to develop here is that together in community, we create our faith, right? So I gave this to Harriet and she held on to it until she died, and then yes, it came back to me. But when I was finished with this, I realized, oh, I've done something interesting here. That this is all of us creating our faith together. So thank you, Kathy, for reminding me of that. So I think I said that I was going to offer a benediction for us as we let us close this evening with a blessing for all of us. But I would like to, in particular, dedicate this blessing to our educators who are not conformed to this world, but are transformed by the renewing of minds, the renewing of hearts, the renewing of bodies and souls, who seek to discern what is your will, O God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Empower them, we pray, that they may open us and then transform us. Together with them, we humbly offer you these quilts, these witnesses, these prayers in thread to you through Christ, the one who knew our suffering, now and evermore. Yes.
Will you join me in thanking Mark? Hey, Kathy. We thank Harriet as well. And thank you all for attending tonight, taking time out of your evening and your week to be with us tonight. I wanted to make one announcement. On Saturday, Kathy will be leading a time of quilting together, and you are all welcome back here from 1 to 4 p.m. on Saturday afternoon to participate in some quilting. So if this piqued your interest and you're interested in learning about quilting, it's for any skill level, right? And we have a couple of very experienced quilters here as well who will be with us supporting Kathy in that work. So thanks again. And the quilts will be here for a couple weeks still. So you're welcome to come visit us on campus. Those of you attending online, if you haven't seen them in person, we'd love to have you here. Yes, thank you so much and have a great night.